Hello, everyone. I'm just waiting for everyone to get out of the waiting room and into the meeting. I hope if you're in Kentucky, you didn't get swept away with all the rain we've had today. Okay, so we'll go ahead and get started. Thank you everyone for being here to learn more about the USEF Horse Welfare Guidelines. My name is Natalie Voss. I'm the Director of Corporate Communications for USEF, and I'm here with David O'Connor, who is our Chief of Sport, who's going to walk us through the guidelines. Once David has given you an overview of the guidelines and how they're designed to work, we will have plenty of time at the end for questions. So if you want to submit a question, use the Q&A feature down at the bottom toolbar, the bottom of your Zoom screen, and send us a question, and we will see it and answer it at the end as we're able. So thanks very much. Over to David.
Great. Good evening, everybody, and thanks for joining us. One of the things is, like, I think the USEF or any of the NGB organizations have always been into a place where, welfare has been, part of the discussion. Now, we've ramped it up, certainly in the last 3 years, about putting horses and starting this campaign about putting horses first. And I think that has been driven actually by some of the town halls that we've had, town halls at the annual meeting, questions and comments and asks from the general membership across that line. And listening to that, you start to think about, okay, what is possible, what is needed, and the directions that we go, which obviously in a governance organization sometimes takes a while because you want to socialize it all the way across the membership and have the membership and the groups and stakeholders involved being able to have an effect or thought process. And that is what's been happening over these last couple of years. And so one of these things that we've come up with is this guideline side of the equation. So if we can go on to the next slide, the Horse Welfare Guidelines, right? And so these are based, under a very solid set of rules that have been processed over the last, well, you can say even 30 years, but certainly in the last several years, the membership has had input on this, and the board has decided to go down this road. And so these are guidelines that are actually starting to help that process about what are we all looking for, and what are we looking cross discipline for all horses. What are we actually looking for? What could an official look for? What could an organization look for? What would the public look for? And what hopefully all of us as horsemen, what we would all look for. Okay, we go on to the next, please. So we all know, the general thing that, we all are in the horse world, and they are our partners in what we do. And the recognition of the scientific side that they have a space here. They're sentient beings, they have emotion, and putting that forward. And as the sport is increasing, becoming much more of a public situation, and in a place where not all of the public actually sees horses every day like they used to 80 years ago, where's the evolution of how we do sports and how we put it in front of it so that we make sure that the horse stays up in the front part of this relationship. So there is a different place that we're dealing with in the world that is, again, I think evolutionary, not revolutionary. And so rules and regulations and processes and officials, that is all one side of the equation, and no question they're there to protect where we're going. But it is one side of the question. So we want to make sure that we are also in a place where amongst ourselves that we are presenting what we want to celebrate our horses in any of the disciplines, doesn't make any difference, of how we celebrate our horses and putting them into the world that we look at and the world from outside that the public can look at. Okay, so we can go on if we please. So it starts with that understanding between an idea that we have put forward of the stoplight deck. The idea literally kind of came from the German Federation put something out 5 or 6 years ago that was actually more targeted towards roller or hyperflexion. And we looked at that document and took that document and played around with it. And we probably Americanized it in a way that we take this image of a stoplight that we all know, go, caution, and you can't go. And taking that image and taking it into a world that how do we have that image and how we put that forward into what we do. That is what these guidelines are about. So the guidelines are really starting to talk about what we look at as the boundaries to the sport and what would be acceptable, what is being celebrated, what is concerning, and what really is actions that would need to be stopped that none of us would celebrate and none of us would want to put out there. Okay, so we go on. So the idea is this, green, yellow, red. So, green would be something that we all like, no matter what the discipline, we all like to watch. We all understand it. We see that the horses understand it and they're content, and there's a connection between whatever the job that the horses riders are doing. But we're like, okay, that's pretty good. That's pretty cool. The cautionary one is where it starts to make you start to feel uncomfortable, but it could be something that is quite short term. And okay, I can understand that kind of went in a direction, but it solved itself and we're comfortable now for a short period of time. And then there is the red, where we would say that's not acceptable. That is not okay. That is something that we would not want to celebrate. That is something that we don't want to put out in front of not only ourselves, but also the public. I think it's one thing, but it actually is, there are actions that we all know that is not what we're about. And I think that is the red side. And so we've started to go down this road of trying to put in categories about some of these things where this green, yellow, red could it could be understood, from an official's point of view, from a rider's point of view, from a public point of view. Okay, so I think we go on. So the first subject that we have is kind of the way of riding, right? And so you get the feeling when you watch somebody that you like to watch a ride, you love to watch a ride, there's harmonious, there's the horse is content, it's in a natural way, even with all the job that it's doing, and the horse feels confident and content. The yellow one suddenly gets into a place that maybe aids, of which we all have natural aids or techniques, or in a place that start to make you feel uncomfortable. Anywhere from aggressive use of, the bits or spurs or techniques or actions, whips, spurs, artificial aids. I mean, those are all things that start to become something that makes you start to feel uncomfortable. I know for me, I start to squirm a little bit when I'm starting to watch it, but it could be very short term and it solves itself. And red would be something that suddenly emotion tends to come into it. So it becomes very aggressive or anger, the emotional outbreaks, techniques that are really in a place where the horse is not able to get it and understand it. And so that becomes anywhere from a head neck posture or from the use of your reins, the use of your natural aids of legs, even the exercises. And you suddenly get to that place where it gets to something that you feel like is not acceptable, and that's where it needs to be stopped and break the cycle. And this is where going to an official who would be in that area would be the place to first direct the ability to have a conversation to be able to stop something that is really unacceptable. And I think it's one thing that we have to make sure that it's unacceptable, not only just to outside public who maybe not be solely educated, but actually when you get down to it, it's actually unacceptable from within the horse industry too. That is a way of training or a way of going that is not something that we would want to celebrate, and that is not going to get horse and rider to the place where we can start to celebrate what they do. So that's the way of riding or training. Again, these are guidelines. It's always going to be a little bit of a judgment call between somebody what they feel is unacceptable or acceptable behavior. I think we pretty much all agree with what is, horse friendly and green. But that yellow red, that's always going to be a little bit of a judgment call from officials or people around. That is going to always be a part of it. But we have judges, we have officials for that. Judges do it every day. They decide in their judgment of whether that is good and that is great, that is not so good, that's inefficient, whether we're talking about any of the subjective sports. That's what judges are for. That's what they do. And that's where officials have this role. Okay, if we can go on. So the next thing we talk about is the horse's movement, right? So again, in that, we get that natural side, even in the different frames that horses are put in for their different jobs. But it is a place where the horse is content and understands it, and you get the feeling that they get it. The cautionary side is where you start to see that stress, where you see it in their face, where you see it in their body, you see it in their tail. That you start to see that insecurity and stress that becomes part of it. Actually, it can be on the dull side, or tiredness or strain side, or it could be on the other side where you're talking about not because of heat, but because of that excessive, foaming sweat, which is usually due to stress. Or you see their tail within the total package starting to show their insecurity or their stress. But again, it might be a short-term thing and somebody deals with it well, and that would be a place where we would want it to go. The red is the unacceptable side, where we talk about lameness, no question. We talk about, excessive kind of repeated rearing or bucking. The horse doesn't want to be there, bolts or kicks out in response to what's happening, and repeated side, not just a buck because of it's a fly or a bird or something like that, but that excessive thing where you feel like the horse just doesn't want to be there. Head shaking, doing to the aids, or basically that kind of resistance. That's where that you start to look for. And also a horse being pressed too hard and pressed too long, where suddenly it's starts to become unresponsive to aids and unresponsive to actions, where they start to, in that word that they use in the animal science, where they start to disassociate themselves from the world they are. And that would be something that really, really needs to be stopped, because we want the horses to understand, not just do what the jobs and the games that we play, but that they understand the jobs and the games that we play. Okay, so we go on. So then we get into the head neck position. This is where a big conversation's been going over for a number of years, where you start to see horses that are, on long necks in the way that we want. The horses are, basically kind of out in front of the vertical, whether that is in a very high head carriage, where, some of the breeds and disciplines have, compared to hunters, which is very, very long and very low, but it's out there. So that natural carriage for the job that we're on is something that we want to see. That softness, that lightness, that suppleness is all the way through whatever the job is. The cautionary one is where that head neck starts to be restricted. And in that restriction is where the scientific side of the equation starts to come in. It's kind of been proved in those studies in the last 15 years that restricted head and neck position is in a place where it really has a negative effect on them physically, and it has a negative effect on them mentally. And they really can't let go of themselves in their body because of that restriction. Now, if it's a short time, we are not talking about whether a horse is here and suddenly they go slightly behind the vertical for a short time and all that kind of stuff, and then literally, come back up and present themselves. That's not what we're talking about. So it is not the snapshot of a horse that is slightly behind the vertical, but one that's, because of the aids, because of the bit, because of the aggression, that is where that position starts to get changed and then crosses into the red, where it gets to the place where it is extended. It is because of aggression. It is because of the aids, where that posture is so restrictive that it actually has that negative effect on horses and athletes. So that temporary, just being behind the vertical and then comes back out, that's not a problem. That's not a problem for anybody. It's not what you're looking for. It's the aggressive side of having their chin to their, close to their chest, and that physical contact that is through aggression, or even flexion from side to side, the sawing thing that we've seen people do. That is something that is really, really need to stop. And that is where somebody's got to come up and say, take a break. You're in a place that is not going to get us there. That is not going to be presented to not only your other competitors, but public or anybody. That is not the direction that we is appropriate. And we introduced this idea of, first off, stop the cycle. Have an official stop the cycle, which means really take a break. Here, take 2 or 3 minutes, walk around, have a think about it, and come back and see if there's another way to be able to achieve the goals that you're achieving. Okay, we go on. So then we have the same thing with the horses showing tension and or distress in their mouth. We always want the closed mouth or slightly chewing, that feeling that the horse is very content and accepting of the reins. That is what we're all looking for. But you can start to see where that stress comes in, where the horse starts to grind, or they start to feel like they're very tense and stressed against their against the communication with the riders. Open mouth, showing teeth, or tongue above the bit, repeated tongue above the bit. That is something that suddenly you start to watch, you start to be cautionary. And then the red, where we would want to stop it, is where, again, the tongue has nowhere to go, and it actually, in some different disciplines where you can actually see that it has a restricted blood flow, so it turns blue. Any type of blood or lesions or rawness around the mouth is, that needs to be stopped or looked at. Any type of bleeding or bare or raw patches, that is something that has to be. So even the blood rules within the USEF, that would be stopped and looked at. And then if that blood is fresh and comes back and flows back, then that horse cannot continue on. If it's something that goes away in a heartbeat, that you go, wipe it and it doesn't come back, and you're like, okay, well, that horse could compete, or it could go into a competition ring and have the same thing. So, the repeatable side of blood coming back is something that needs to be stopped. But the one-off, the horse, maybe has a little bite of its tongue or its lip or something like that, and it goes away in a heartbeat. That is not something that it needs to be. Yes, it is something that needs to be looked at, but then it could be continued to allow the horse to compete. Okay. So the use of equipment is a little bit along the same lines, whether we talk about nosebands or other artificial aids. We want to make sure that the equipment is not producing these restrictive and aspects of the other, whether we talk about head neck position, or whether we're talking about their mouth, or whether we're talking about whether the body is, that the use of equipment actually doesn't produce these type of things. So whether it's overly tight equipment, or the nosebands or boots, or double bridles, that could be where suddenly the curb bit is, more than a 40, and somebody's leaning back on that curb, at more than a 45-degree angle. So where it's suddenly becoming a very restrictive side of the equation. So that's the incorrect use of that, whatever that bit is. So, and then we go into the, again, stopped extensive, longer term, where we talk about the use of draw reins or use of a noseband that restricts the horse's motion or produces any type of bloody or raw patches that equipment actually produces. That is something that needs to be stopped. And so that is really where this direction goes. We also can talk about whips and spurs. We're not anybody would say that the whip cannot be used or a spur not can be used. But a whip must be used to a place where the horse has a place to go. He has a place to go forward. That it's not used in a punishing way of a horse standing there. He's got no way to go, and either through anger, frustration, or punishment, that horse is being whipped in a place that he has nowhere to go. It must be a place where a whip or a spur is used to encourage the natural age of the horses going forward. Okay, we're on to the next. So if these things happen, that is where we want to go to an official If you feel like that is crossing a line, even as a fellow competitor or somebody from the outside, you would go to an official and say that is concerning, or really that needs to be stopped. And the official would then come up, be the person that actually has that interaction with the rider, which could be, hopefully at the beginning, is quite just conversation cautionary. And then the second thing, if it goes on beyond that, then it could develop into something where there are more warnings. So if you have that, if you're witnessing that and it's making you feel uncomfortable, competition official is the first line of conversation. If it feels like it's more than that, you do have that ability to report it directly into the USEF through a form, the Horse Abuse and Unethical Treatment Report form that is on the website, the USEF website, or you can contact the USEF directly. You will be answered. Those are the two avenues. If you feel like it needs to be anonymous, but you can still submit a report by text or WhatsApp to that 283-733, 28733, sorry, to USEF. Those are the way that you can report by text if you want to do it anonymously. Okay, so that we go on to the next about really talking about what this conversation has. So depending on the situation, whether it's in that yellow side or whether it's the red side, hopefully that first part is just advisory in nature and provides a thought process of where that goes, and that thought process directly to the athlete. So hopefully it's just cautionary, right, in nature, right? And if it's a minor, maybe you have to go to the trainer, not just to the rider into the place. If it's more than that, then there are now different levels that the USEF has put together. There's a verbal warning, there's a recorded warning, and there's a yellow warning card. Or it could go straight on to that the official, if it's really egregious, could go on to disqualification or elimination. But the verbal warning or recorded warning the recorded warning is a new system this year that it has been used quite a lot in the USEF this year. The recorded warning is something where it is brought. There's a conversation. It is going down there, and it feels like it needs to be recorded. So later competitions could actually know about it. But it is a warning that has a little bit more effect. The yellow warning card is a little bit more comprehensive, and the multiple sides of a yellow warning card could actually lead to disciplinary actions if it's repeated over time. The one, not so much, but if it's repeated over a time within a year, then disciplinary actions could actually happen. The USEF always, the governing body always has the ability to assess additional penalties if it gets to that place. But you get the feeling that the beginning part of it is not punitive in a place before it steps up into the regulatory process. And then the regulatory process has a system underneath it that could go on for the more egregious cases. But we would hope that those cases will never get to that level. We're actually looking at, the first advisory in nature or the cautionary nature would be enough to be able to take care of the whatever issue that people felt that they were being uncomfortable with. And again, it's a judgment call. It will always be a judgment call. The education of this is coming out to the officials. We've had this stoplight deck out in front of the officials quite a bit. Will be part of their education system. It is part of the conversation in actually producing this document. They've been a big part of this, and this is where we are. So, but the judgment call is always going to be a part of it, no question. Okay, so we go on. So what we're looking for is, to produce the pictures that we want to put out into the world, right? No matter what the breed or discipline is, we want to make sure that we can celebrate what we do. And that is the goal. And we know that emotions, in competition environments, you see it in every different sport, outside of the horse world, inside of the horse world. You see it in soccer, you see it in football. where emotions do get going, and to have somebody break that cycle, to be able to stop that thought process and having the person reassess and then go on to it is an important part of all sport, no matter whether it's horse sports or other sports. That is a realistic part of what we're all passionate about and what we all want to produce, to be able to put forward. So it's really important that this conversation happens, that this conversation happens in a very, very broad sense, from our own public, to our own officials, to our own trainers, which is what this call about. The more that we can talk about it, the more that we can put out in front of it, the more that we can have even some debates about where that line is. That is always going to be positive, because the horses will always win in the end, and that is our goal, that we can celebrate what we do with horses, and not get into a place where we're always having to defend what we do with horses. So that's kind of the direction that we've gone. We've spent, probably the last 9 months taking this into a place of trying to create first drafts and socializing it in between officials and riders and competition management, and taking it into a broader thing. The board, everybody's had an effect on what this document is about. Over this last 9 months, there's been a tremendous amount of collaboration to be able to start this process. But we really do believe that the more that we can bring this out into a wider audience and have people talk about it, the better we're going to be, and be able to celebrate and promote our sport in the direction that we all believe in, from a personal point of view. So I guess that's kind of where we are. I don't know. So I'm sure that we have some questions racking up here that I can try to answer if that's possible, if I have the ability to. If not, I will find somebody that can.
We have quite a few questions. So maybe the best place to start is, what if somebody is at a competition and they observe something that they think is clearly in the red zone, and they go to an official, and either the official doesn't agree with them that this is in the red zone, or for whatever reason they say, I'm not comfortable taking action here. What can the member who's flagged down that licensed official do in that situation?
Yeah, if you feel it's strongly, the biggest thing is actually start to report it into the USEF directly, right? Because that is the only way that we can know about it. It's if you're into that place where if it's not reported through that system of through the website, using that horse abuse or unethical treatment report form, then the USEF never knows about it, and then and becomes a hearsay thing. So it's really important to feel that if you're strong about it, you feel strong about it, that the report form is used. Those reporting aspects of contacting the USEF directly, or through the forum, or by using the WhatsApp group. That is a really, really important side. Or else, again, the USEF ends up not knowing about it, and that becomes a thing that happens all the time. It happens a lot. People say, well, I saw this, and it was totally out of place and all that kind of stuff. And then you go back and you look, and there was no way to document it. And the USEF didn't react because it didn't actually know about it.
Right, and I know one thing that regulations really appreciates is when somebody's able to take photos and video in the moment like that, and include that when they report, right? Because the more details they have, the more they can do.
Sure, and probably it's a good point to talk at this time about actually the regulation process, because at the first thing when somebody comes in, there is an investigation, and that investigation is not actually that public. If you report, you will get a email back now, newer system, closing the loop, is saying this is actually okay. Thank you very much for your thing. We are investigating it. That investigation is actually not really public, because you found that witnesses can be they will change, as hearsay goes on. So there's an investigation, and that first investigation is deciding whether the USEF1 has jurisdiction. Is it a place that they can react? Is the level of infraction, something that they can work on? After, if it's determined that it is, then there's another investigation, and that investigation is the interview process that goes through a lot of people, including the person that the infraction is about. So that person has the ability to put their side of the story forward. That is the American law system. That person can defend themselves in their place and put it forward. Those two things happen before it's actually recommended to a hearing committee, where then the hearing committee can hear all sides and again have the open dialogue with both sides of the case if it gets to that place. It could be settled before through an administrative deal. Somebody says, yeah, I did that, I'm sorry. And it could be done administratively. But if it goes to the hearing committee, that's really kind of the fourth part of it. That all takes time. And I know that everybody feels if that happens on a Saturday, then Monday, this person should be in trouble. And that is not going to happen for the fairness of all involved, including the person that is having an infraction talked about them, that in the end, or produced to them, that is in the end, that does take time. And everybody I know absolutely gets frustrated because of the time. That doesn't mean that the process isn't happening. It is a timeline that is longer than what most people think to go through those steps before some type of conclusion happens in the end.
Yes, and that's why right, we don't have sort of a standard time frame for how
No,
long cases it take. We had somebody specifically ask, like, how long does the review process take? And as I understand it, it varies a lot depending on how that investigation rolls out, and there can be all kinds of delays in the background that.
yeah, and we do have, we have hired in the USEF, we have hired people that is their investigative. That's all they do. They investigate things. We have very, very professional people that have come out of law enforcement for some of the investigations. Some of the other investigations are at different levels. But we have people that's what they do, is investigate and follow up on these type of things to be able to put the decisions forward into the legal system if needed.
We also had somebody sort of follow up and ask, will judges or stewards be notified about reports from their shows, or do they have to report interactions that take place at horse shows? Now, I know that there's a few different ways that that can happen, including competition and licensed official evaluations, right?
Absolutely. So, in every competition, there are, stewards, judges all fill out forms about what happened at that competition. And if there are infractions of this, that is, it does get logged through them if it comes down through the official. If that is brought to somebody, again, there's going to be a closed loop side of the beginning that this protest was heard, or this situation was heard, and we are investigating it. So that closed loop thing is something that we are doing now. We probably haven't been that good at that in the past, but the USEF is doing that now. So officials there will be a closed loop side of it. So that investigation is being sought after and as in a process, not that it just goes into a dark hole and gets forgotten about.
We have someone asking, you mentioned that the process of determining whether something is a yellow or a red situation is a judgment call. How is that judgment made? And I know we've had people sort of say, well, why can't we just have a black and white yes, no list that helps us be absolutely sure, yellow versus red, what we're looking at. Can you speak a little bit to sort of the importance of
Yeah,
context?
that always is the difficult line. And I would give the example of a regular judge, in good situation. Why did they pick 1 over 2 or 2 over 3, right? Or in the dressage world, why are you going to give that a 7 and why are you going to give that an 8? That judgment is always going to be part of it, and that takes experience, number one, and education, number two. And we are fully committed of educating, even through things like this, putting this in front of the judges. But there's always going to be a little bit of a call of where that somebody feels that, whether I would say that would be a red, and Natalie, you would say that, okay, but I'm going to let it go for another 2 minutes and see, it seems to be resolving itself. That is going to be that judgment call between the human nature side of judging itself. And I don't believe that there's any way that there is to put that into such a black and white aspect that would be beneficial to beneficial to anybody. It's going to be a judgment call. We just have to make sure that our officials have the experience and education to lead that way. And we also know that sometimes the officials are going to make mistakes that maybe we don't agree with. That happens also time in a field of play decision. But we have to feel like we support the system and support the system in a place that we know is going to be generally positive for the sport as it goes forward.
Well, and one thing that we had talked about in yesterday's webinar is I brought up the example of I have a horse that does what we call the helicopter tail when he's
Sure.
having just a wonderful time. You know, ideally, you would hope that the rest of his body language, which otherwise looks pretty relaxed to enthusiastic, would make it clear to somebody that, you know, this isn't a horse who's stressed. This is a horse who just has got to do something with his excitement. And apparently what he's doing is flinging his
Yeah,
tail.
and fun enough, there'll be in places in the non-subjective sports, like jumping, if a horse hangs his tongue out the side. Maybe it's an X-race horse or something like that. That's what he does. I mean, I've had horses that have been that way. It's not, there's no tension to it. But in the subjective sports where that's not, objective sports where that's not penalized, that wouldn't be a thing that you would have to say is a tension related. It is a thing that he might have learned young. And so putting the total package together, seeing the tension in the way the horse is moving, the way his head carriage is, the way that his face and his expression is, that total package always has to be part of the game here.
Makes sense. We have somebody with a question that I think comes up from time to time that is based a little bit in jurisdiction. They're asking, given the long timeline for investigations, are there situations where a horse would be taken away from a rider or trainer while the investigative process moves forward, like Child Protective Services?
Yeah, that's a very difficult side of the equation. We talk about that horses that people have that ability in very, very egregious things to be provisionally suspended. The USEF doesn't have warrant power. It doesn't have subpoena power. So to go in sporting type of decisions and not horse welfare care side, which is where community, local laws, county laws, state laws, federal laws would come in about care of a horse, where they would have that ability to take a horse away. But federal, state, county, local laws very much are about care, right? We're actually talking about in this aspect about some from the training side. So if it is felt like it gets to the place where there's a care side of the equation, where the horse's well-being is in jeopardy, that's the way, then going to local authorities, county authorities, state authorities would be the direction to go into that.
Somebody has asked, is there a statute of limitations on horse abuse reports? Like, Safe Sport sometimes goes back several years, sometimes many years, when somebody's able to make a report. And does that same thing apply here?
Yeah, so we have a rule called 838, which is our unethical treatment of horses rule that was changed last year, after, again, a year of kind of consultation with the community. In that idea of all aspects of that unethical treatment of horses, which there is an anti-retaliation side of it, there's lots of different parts of that pieces. The decision was at that point that we would start at that time where that rule goes forward. Okay, so we would talk about I'm thinking January 1st, 2025 or 26. No, 25 would be from that rule forward. So we are not looking back. We felt like that was going to be a place that would be too big for our organization to handle. So from, I think it's January 1st,
I think it
2025
was
forward,
December
or
1st,
it's December 1st,
24.
2025 forward under this aspect of unethical treatment. That is where that's where that line in the sand has been drawn.
And this relates to that expansion of GR 838, which I think was December 2024. Does this program only cover actions at horse shows?
No, it can, the 838 can go out to situations where a member could bring something to the federation. And again, I said before that the federation doesn't have the subpoena power, they don't have warrant power, so they're not coming to look for it on your farm. But if somebody brought egregious behavior through video, which would be proved and has to be proved through data and analytics, or witness statements to the place where it's written down, those things are where that line is for something that would be brought to the federation, much more than the federation going out and having the ability to look for it on your farm. So that won't happen. But if somebody brings something that is egregious, totally egregious, to the that will be investigated and taken through that regulatory process.
And that's from December 1st of 2024 forward.
24 on.
Yeah. Yes. In today's world of social license to operate, we have someone asking, what can amateurs do at local shows to sort of help this concept along? And I'm guessing this question is sort of based on a culture change that somebody would like to see, even at unsanctioned shows. Like, what can they do to help get people's mindsets kind of in this framework, even if this isn't a sanctioned show?
Sure, I know. I believe talking about it, number one, is the idea, right? To be quite open about this conversation, but even in local shows, being able to talk because you have officials there. Having that ability to talk to officials and having somebody talk to them, or a competition manager, be able to talk to them. The big thing is to try to get it out into the our community and having the community deal with it, whether it's a personal, because it's a personal friend and you can say take a break, which has happened. They had a very good positive effect of that within the trainers within the AQHA. From Dr. Herb brought to us, he said actually they had a big effect of the trainers going to trainers. I'm like, hey, that's kind of crossing line, take a break here. That was actually a very positive effect. So that comfort level, or the officials or competition management, would be the place that we can put this out into the public domain of conversations.
Great. I think that's all the questions I have in my queue right now. If you guys have questions, then be sure to use the Q&A feature down at the bottom of your toolbar. We did have somebody ask at the very end yesterday, and I wanted to make sure you all know for today the recorded version of this, as well as yesterday's webinar for trainers and professionals, will be available for people who can't attend today, where I think those get emailed out automatically to people who registered, and then also we'll be able to put those recorded versions on our website. So
we also want to say that this is backed up by a series of videos that we've actually done through the Federation. So there are, I think, 4 or 5 out there now that we've actually put this into more of a visual case of talking about red, yellow and green, the stoplight deck. There's videos now that are now onto the website. And Protect the Horse campaign that is out there now, with several of them that have been released, that delve into a little bit some of the visual and physical sides. So it is kind of a two-pronged effect here. But we really do want to thank everybody for joining us and having this conversation. And I would encourage everybody to have this conversation in a larger sphere, just within everybody's own worlds. I think that's an important part of that. The community actually comes behind and starting to drive this process, and not just think about it as a governance thing.
Yes, and if you want to share the presentation that David went through, the PowerPoint that he went through today, or the videos that we've done that delve deeper into different parts of this, you can find all of this on our Protecting Horses page. So if you go to the USCF homepage and you click on the Horse Welfare tab at the top there, you'll find a page that's called Protecting Horses. And that's where all of this lives. There's also an item under that drop down called Report Unethical Treatment. So if you need reporting resources, all of that is right there as well. All right. Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate it and have a great night.
Okay, thanks, everybody.